A former FDA commissioner revealed that social distancing laws were, and this is a quote, arbitrary. Meanwhile, a UK expert said politicians intervened to establish the concept of lockdowns. So where's this science that we're supposed to be following when it's arbitrary and political? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to truth and freedom that requires that we do not fall into easy somnambulance and amnesia, that we stay awake. We remember the events of 6 months ago, of a year ago. We stay alert and track narratives and recognize where matters have changed. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. And if you want to spend some time with me live at a festival with Wim Hof, Vandana Shiva, Community is happening between July the 14th and July the 17th. There's a link in the description. Get your tickets now. All the money goes to help drug addicts and people with mental health issues. It's a fantastic event. You will love it. You will love being free because for a while you were locked down. And Chris Whitty, who was the UK strategist and scientific expert whose guidance was followed during the lockdown period here in this country, has revealed that he would not have recommended lockdowns without political intervention. Meanwhile, in the United States, a former FDA commissioner has said that social distancing rules were arbitrary. So remember how that whole discourse was conducted. Follow the science. This is what's necessary. You're not an expert. You're not a doctor, are you? That was the kind of rhetoric that was deployed throughout that period. Isn't it interesting to see that dismantled and fall apart? What is being revealed to us? What is being revealed as the real agenda behind it? I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. That's not true. I am actually interested in conspiracy theories. But I don't think this is a conspiracy theory. I think what we're starting to be able to observe is either the conscious or unconscious biases of powerful interests and how they led to a set of measures and legislation that was either financially favourable to the corporate class or politically expedient to those already in government. Let's unpack it now. Scientists would not have proposed lockdowns without ministers suggesting them, the UK's most senior doctor has said. Sir Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer for England, told the COVID inquiry he would have been surprised if scientists had included national shutdowns as part of the planning for a pandemic. It's interesting that lockdowns were a key component of the strategy when it wasn't derived from science. Where did it come from then? If scientists weren't proposing it, where did it come from? We were all assumed that there was a reason, not an abstract reason, a scientific reason. And this was the one I thought it was. You can't go out because it will lead to the disease spreading more rapidly and killing more people. Therefore, are you willing to compromise and stay in your house? The answer of any sane person is yes, of course. I don't want people to die as a result of my actions. So yeah, I'm happy to stay indoors. Well, that wasn't ever scientific. So what was it then? Let me know in the comments what could have been the idea if it wasn't derived from science. If it doesn't come from science, where does it come from? Giving evidence on the 8th day of the inquiry, I suppose we should be grateful that there is an inquiry. Sir Chris said planning for such an extraordinarily major social intervention would not have occurred unless a minister had requested it. Not suggested, requested, asked for it. Sir Chris said that lockdowns were a leap of imagination. That's not what you want in government, is it? Okay, what are you doing now? I'm just using my imagination to leap around. You're not a poet. It's not Lewis Carroll. It's not Alice in Wonderland, is it? It's not Herman Melville. Wait a minute. What should we do? There's a national crisis. Well, I'm going to go firstly into my imagination. And once I'm in there, I'm going to start leaping and bounding like a poet rather than an administrator who's supposed to use taxpayer dollars or pounds in order to administrate favourably for the people that I was elected to serve. That's what they're meant to be doing, not leaping about in their imagination. He also claimed that a lack of radical thinking had hindered the country's planning for the pandemic. Of course, what this pertains to is the idea that potentially lockdown in some ways may have caused more deaths than they prevented, if not specifically related to the pandemic, then related to heart disease, people missing cancer treatments, people ending their own lives, the impact on mental health and addiction more broadly, diabetes, operations being missed, the list goes on and on and on. It's not a leap of the imagination, it's just someone reading a list of potential consequences that were apparently overlooked, but not for scientific reasons. That's been revealed. So what's the other reason? Tell me in the comments. He became the latest senior figure to admit that the UK had a long-standing bias in favour of influenza when it came to pandemic planning and admitted there should be a separate plan for other types of viruses. That's a favourable way of looking at it, that whenever they're strategically looking at the idea of a pandemic, influenza is the template that they rely on, and in the event of an influenza-like virus, these measures will be useful. As Jordan Peterson says, never assume malfeasance when ineptitude will do. So perhaps these people that we're paying are just inept rather than malfeasant and didn't recognize that this is not influenza, it's not behaving like influenza, and measures that are required for influenza will not be successful in this instance. But given that we know it wasn't scientific anyway, what else could it have been? Asked about some of the interventions used during the pandemic, Sir Chris said social measures such as quarantine and individual isolation were not new, and some went back to the Middle Ages. Could we maybe put leeches on their skin? And maybe some of these people are witches. So if they float, I think that means they are a witch. And if they sink to the bottom, they wasn't a witch. Wait a minute, they're already dead. Never mind, let's just do that anyway. You can't say that something was scientific and follow the science when the ideas come from the medieval days when people didn't even understand stuff like germs and atoms.
Your primitive intellect wouldn't understand alloys and compositions and things with molecular structures in the...
We're following the science. What science? Well, this is my lucky chicken. And this stick I use to determine whether or not there's evil demons and stuff. Oh, that sounds pretty scientific. I know. It's my favourite one of my lucky demon sticks. However, he said that lockdown had not been considered in advance and that scientific committees would rarely plan for such extreme measures unless asked to by a minister. So what many people thought is that political objectives were being masked under the orthodoxy of science, and that the science itself was particular sets of scientific data utilised in order to undergird political thinking. That some information was included, some information was rejected. So it was unfair and disingenuous even to use the word science to describe something that was plainly a political agenda. That's the theory that I'm offering you, or hypothesis to be more accurate. The very big new idea was the idea of lockdown. I'm talking here very, very specifically about the state saying people have to go home and stay home except under very limited circumstances. A very radical thing to do, he said. So Chris Whitty's sort of not circling back on that because he said he didn't think it was a good idea in the first place. What it seemed to me, just as a person that was just affected by the pandemic and the subsequent measures, was China, as a very authoritarian, centralized state, tyrannical country, were able to go, use lot are staying in your house, like, get out of Tiananmen Square, otherwise we're going to run you over type stuff. And we went, oh, should we do that then? But we're not meant to be like that, are we? Aren't we always claiming freedom, liberty? We're going to war with that country. Why? Well, they don't like liberty and freedom, and we love it, as you know. So when we see other people not doing it, we kill them, particularly if they've got, oil over there, or if we can sell some weapons off the back of it. But the main thing always has been liberty and freedom. But if at the first opportunity to bang people up in their houses when it's not scientifically necessary and there's no evidence to suggest it's something you should do and the ideas come from the Middle Ages, starts to challenge the whole model, doesn't it? Comments. Continue to give you all of this information without support. Do you not think that we're attacked on a daily basis by the tools and armies of the mainstream? Do you not think we're censored and shadow banned within an inch of our life? That's why we're grateful to have partners like these guys supporting us, and you can bet your little bottom that you'll get a discount of some description. Inflation is rising, interest rates are rising, the cost of living is going through the bloody roof. But thanks to ExpressVPN, you could save money by cutting down on your subscriptions to streaming services like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Apple TV. That's because a service like Netflix has thousands of shows that you don't even know about. They've got secret shows. The shows you get depend on the country that you live in. Racism. By using the ExpressVPN app, I can change my online location. And with 90 countries to choose from, every time I run out of stuff to watch, I just switch to another country to unlock new shows instead of signing up to yet another streaming service. Which is good news if, like me, you're a massive fan of South Korean rom-coms and South American telenovelas. Even better, some services cost less in other countries. For example, if you buy Netflix from Argentina, it costs a fraction of the price. ExpressVPN is less than $7 a month, so it won't be long until it pays for itself. Go to expressvpn.com/brand, and by visiting my link, you'll get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN service for free. Now back to the other version of me that didn't have the gall to wear such a wonderful garment. I would have thought it would be very surprising without this being requested by a senior politician or similar that a scientific committee would venture in between emergencies into that kind of extraordinarily major social intervention with huge economic and social impact ramifications. That's the dude that was in charge of the science now, saying something that 6 months ago would have basically made you Joe Rogan's schizophrenic cousin, high on horse paste. So let's say again, it would be very surprising without being requested by a senior politician, so someone basically like the leader of a country, a president or a prime minister, the scientific committee, right, that means people that are just interested in data, would venture in between emergencies into that kind of extraordinarily major social intervention with huge economic and social impact ramifications. The very things that we were talking about. Go back and have a look. Go check the date. Go check our YouTube videos from that exact time and see what we're saying. You can rely on us. You can tell what we were saying then because it's on tape and it's on YouTube. Just about for now. Unless WHO guidelines, which YouTube use, means that it'll all be taken down, in which case, go to Rumble. It's very difficult for the committees to go beyond a certain level unless they are asked to do so externally. So they don't even have the authority or power. So what was always framed as scientific was always, in fact, political. Now, you have to ask yourself, what forces do you think determine political outcomes? Ask yourself some questions about this. How are political parties funded? Where do they get their money from? Is there such a thing as lobbying? Who benefits from this? Do people in Congress own stocks and shares in certain organisations that they themselves regulate? Ask yourselves those questions and then with the answers, just come up with your own ideas. So Chris was asked about written evidence from Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, as to whether there was focus on worst case scenarios. He was the health minister at the time. He was one of the people that was in charge, a bit like not like our Fauci, but he was in a guiding, leading role during the period. He said that lockdown would not have worked against many previous outbreaks or pandemics such as HIV, swine flu, plague and cholera, but was adopted around the world as countries struggled to stop COVID. It was kind of like a mass panic and a mass hysteria, and that's being kind about it because many of you will point out, won't you, in the comments that they've planned for events such as these, Event 201, those things that happened in 2016 that gamed out this stuff. You'll probably be interested in what happened in those scenarios. But let's try our best to be kind and compassionate and say, well, everyone just sort of panicked and went into a hysteria. But all the while that the rhetoric was around science, shouldn't we have been saying, well, is this working and is this effective and what's happening in countries where they're not doing it? We should have used the data to reach conclusions that had the maximum benefit, risk-benefit, mitigation strategies incorporated and then regulate on that basis. Comments? The inquiry also heard from Sir Patrick Vallance, the former chief scientific officer, who said he regrets how long it took papers from SAGE, that was the body that was coordinating the response, to be made public. Oh, are you surprised by how long it takes for information to be made public? The real problem's Donald Trump and his little box of secrets, isn't it? Whereas regularly, information is kept back. Why? To protect us? Or could there be some other reason the information is kept back? I think in principle, the science advice, unless it's national security related, should become public, he said, adding, the advice took longer than it should to be published. So now we know it's political, it's not scientific, and it was, if not censored, it was contained and kept back. What does that start to suggest? Professor Dame Sally Davis, who was Chief Medical Officer for England from 2011 to 2019 before Professor Sir Chris Whitty. How many names is this guy got? Professor, Sir, Your Highness, Chris Whitty. Yes? Do what we fucking tell you. Told the COVID inquiry that lockdown damaged a generation of children. People were saying that at the time, weren't they? Are you exhausted? Scientists from Johns Hopkins University and Lund University examined almost 20,000 studies on measures taken to protect populations against COVID across the world and said their findings showed that the draconian measures had a negligible impact on COVID mortality and were a policy failure of gigantic proportions. But of course, the nature of the pandemic is it had an international impact. There were many, many suggestions that were made and enforced, proposed, put forward aggressively where people were shamed, shut down if they didn't toe the line. Another one was social distancing, right? Stand 2 meters back. And again, if this is in order to save lives, if this is scientifically verifiable information that's come from scientists, then of course we're happy to obey, right? Because human life is sacred and we're all here to protect each other. That's the way we run the world, right? In December 2021, one of former President Trump's commissioners of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, told CBS's Face the Nation, the 6-foot social distancing rule created to slow the spread of the coronavirus was arbitrary and has decreased confidence in the pandemic response. Yes, when you present something as science that is in fact arbitrary, that will decrease the authority of the people that make those suggestions. If you say, do not stand any closer than 6 feet, that's scientifically because of the vapor, you see, and the spores, what they do. Let me show you a diagram, in fact. The spores will go from here and then just go, I made it up. That's what arbitrary means. They made it up. It was just made up. That will decrease people's trust in authority. The 6-foot rule, Gottlieb said, was a compromise between the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which had recommended 10 feet, and an unnamed political appointee in the Trump administration who called 10 feet inoperable. 10 feet, that's too far. Nobody can do 10 feet. How about 6? Yeah, I say 6. Both the 10-foot and 6-foot recommendations were unfounded, said Gottlieb. Even the 10 was made up. I reckon 10 feet. Why? I don't know. 10. 10 fingers, you know? 10 original states. 10. Who don't like 10 out of 10s? Lists of 10. 10. Yeah, but isn't this meant to be about science? 10 and show the lack of rigor in how the CDC made public health recommendations. We're going to make these recommendations based on numbers that we pull straight out of the air. Here's one, 6 feet away. What about 10? No, that's inoperable. 6. What about 32 feet? If I don't take 10, I'm not going to take 32. How about 4 feet? I don't like 4. 4's unlucky. 6. Should we vote on 6? What's the point in voting? It doesn't do anything. Hey, you can't say that. Many people assume they're all traces to some old studies on the flu, which found droplets won't travel further than 6 feet, Gottlieb said. Well, I got these old studies on the flu, and they say droplets don't travel further than 6 feet. Okay, well, that'll do, I suppose. Oh, come on, I like 10. 10, that film with Dudley Moore in it. 10, the number that Pele and Maradona wore. 10! The 6-foot rule was probably the single costliest recommendation that the CDC made, Gottlieb said, because the whole thing feels arbitrary and not science-based, which lowers public confidence. Well, in our country, we're locking people in their house for the same reason. Feels like the sort of thing you might do. Superstition, medieval laws, old science papers. We were told this was science. Oh, these people are idiots. These various anti-vaxxers and these conspiracy theorists, nut jobs that are not respecting science of numbers that we've made up and measures that we've gleaned from the medieval times. These idiots, these nut jobs, obviously ain't very patriotic, and they deserve everything. We should shame them. We should shame them. How dare you not believe in our hocus pocus superstitions of made up numbers? So there you are. As we continue to review the impact of the last 3 years, the general medical, psychological, ecological, economic impact of that time, we now have further evidence to suggest that the scientific experts did not have the authority that was claimed. In fact, many of these decisions were political, some of them were arbitrary, some of them were made up on the spot. The very kind of things that were levelled at, like, Canadian truckers and nurses who lost their job because of refusing to take certain medications, and people that were cynical and suspicious, and whole communities of minorities that are cherished when it's bloody convenient. They were cast out as nut jobs and voodoo practitioners, when in fact much of the science was simply stuff that was convenient and made up. The word arbitrary suggests that it was random, lucky. But could there be another objective and agenda? I'm not saying there is, because I like to base things on evidence and science. That's the difference between us and them. When we say science, we mean science. When we say liars, we mean liars. When we say corruption, we mean criminals. When we say inquiry, we mean an inquiry that brings these people to the forefront in order that they may confront justice, a justice derived from a set of values and principles that mean something, not just ways to establish dominion over people and to extract profit from the world's population when it's convenient. But that's just what I think. Why don't you tell me what you think in the comments? If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one. You'll love this interview from our show on Rumble. Or have a look at this video, another video comparable to this one. Remember, you can join us for our community festival between July the 14th and July the 17th. Wim Hof, Vandana Shiva. You will love it. Remember, Brandemic, my comedy special, is available now. There's a link in the description to that as well. But more important than all of this crazy stuff, please stay free.